Good evening. I'm attorney Lawrence Berliner. With me is our co-host, Jane Faherty. I'm an attorney in the field of special education law. Jane is the director of the Stamford Jewish Community Center JumpStart program and a special education advocate. I want to welcome our returning champions, Marla Wayne and Allie Grafman, to our webinar. And before we begin, we'll do a little introduction. We're doing a little something different. Rather than reading the disclaimer that I usually read, one of our guests suggested we just post it as a slide. So I'm just going to put the disclaimer up, and it's in the chat for your reading. And whoever made that suggestion, thank you. It's an excellent suggestion. We're here this evening to continue our third year of conversations, finding your voice as a parent. As we are entering the new year, we're making resolutions to advocate for your child, educational progress and educational excellence. Jane and I are continuing to present our Zoom webinars because we are part of a community of concerned parents and professionals. And after 3 years, we are still learning how to navigate this never-ending environment that started in March 2020 that upended all of our lives, particularly the lives of our children. That's still ongoing. We have moderated a series of webinars to address a myriad of issues in unprecedented times and try to address needs that impact you as parents, professionals, and the children we serve. We have two guests, as I mentioned, Marla Wayne and Allie Grafman, who will be a part of a roundtable discussion with Jane and myself. We're going to be discussing assisting parents to voice their concerns, understanding your child's rights. I'll spend a little time on that. Preparing for the annual review or just regular PPT meetings, challenges to learning, because they're still out there, even though there have been many resources added to the school districts, the challenges remain. And as time allows, next step to help you with when your child or the student is struggling. We have a series of questions that we have received prior to tonight's webinar. If you do have questions, we ask that you put them in the Q&A section, not the chat. As I mentioned in the disclaimer, this is being recorded. What goes in the chat is recorded. What is in the Q&A is not. So Jane, how are you this evening, and what's new with you?
Hi, good evening, Lawrence and Ali and Mara. It's great to be here again. I saw in the chat we have somebody from Brussels. So good morning, Brussels, and good evening, everybody else, I'm assuming, if you're on our timeline. It's good. It's been a busy start to the year. I can't believe it's January the 10th. It feels more like it's February the 10th. But it's good to be back, and it's great that we had so many questions ahead of tonight's discussion. We're looking forward to answering your questions this evening too, and just to remind you, as Lawrence just said, in the Q&A, that way they can be private and confidential, and we will do our best to support and address it. But with regard to myself, I consider myself an educational consultant, I am an advocate, and I'm also the executive director of a program called JumpStart, which is for toddlers, developmental delays or disabilities, both in Stamford and soon to be in a Norwalk location here in Fairfield. So we're looking forward to this evening. I know that Ali and Marla both had lots of suggestions and ideas to contribute tonight. We're just going to use this evening to answer your questions that we've received ahead of time, talk about some current issues that we've all noticed at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. And look forward to this evening. So welcome back, Marla and Ali.
Allie and
okay,
would you introduce yourselves?
just want to add to what you just said, Jane. Welcome everybody, and thank you for tuning us in. It's a great way to start the new year. My name is Allie Grafman, and I am a special education advocate. I've been advocating for families for 9 years now. My previous life was in the public school districts. I was a special education teacher and also a special education administrator. So I feel when I go into meetings and work with parents, I'm experienced in navigating through some of those tight ropes that many of you have also experienced. I own and direct ABC Advocacy, LLC. The ABC stands for Advocacy Brings Change, and I truly believe that. I love what I do, and I'm looking forward to working together tonight and adding some more insight into some of your questions. Thank you.
And Marla, it's lovely to have you here tonight too.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Marla Wayne. I'm a special education advocate as well. I'm the parent of 2 students with IEPs, but one of my children is severely affected with Fragile X syndrome. So I've been navigating both the school district and government supports for the last 20 years. I've been working with families for 10 years. I consult for JW Advocates. So my email is mwayne@jwadvocates.com. And I'm looking forward to our discussion this evening. Thank you.
And I might add, all of our contact information is in the chat. And the person that asked if you're will receive a recording of tonight's webinar, the answer is yes. Afterwards, it'll be available. So anything new and exciting areas of concerns, or should we just get into tonight's topics?
But I think what would be helpful, Lawrence, is I have parents say to me, I don't know the difference between a special education advocate and a special education attorney, particularly in the state of Connecticut, because every state has slight different variations. So Lawrence, can you explain the difference between the roles of an advocate versus an attorney in this field?
Excellent question. And I've asked that all the time. I always start, advocates are not attorneys and attorneys are advocates. So you can see there's a back and forth. We're advocating, but one group goes to law school. We are licensed. We have professional ethics, continuing legal education responsibilities. And advocates sometimes get the similar training. There are courses available to become a trained advocate. I think it's called SEAT, S-E-A-T, from the COPA, Council of Parents and Attorney and Advocates organization. Some people are just listen to Allie's background. She was a special ed administrator. She was a special education teacher. And at some point in her life, from my perspective, she went from the dark side to the light side. No, I'm being facetious. So it's really, it depends. Most of my cases involve, let me back up one second. With advocates, often they're excellent because they have their own experiences. Some of them are coming from the field of special education, administration, teachers, and they have an uncanny perspective to take a look at an IEP and literally get into the weeds of the language of the IEP and make sure it reflects what is necessary based upon the child's unique needs, what's necessary as far as methodology. I don't have that kind of a training, but I certainly have a lot of experience. I've been doing this for well over 35 years. But where I typically get involved is parents have gone to their PPT meetings or IEP meetings in other states, and they're frustrated, or the lines of communication are not there, and they're ready for the next step, such as going to a due process hearing. Many years ago, I was on a panel with an advocate, and maybe the first 10 items, there was little or no difference between the advocate and the attorney. But when we got to a certain point, it diverged, and that's where you get into the litigation. That's where you get into the threats of a due process hearing. That's where you get into the due process hearing if the case is not settled. So I'm trained to be a litigator, and I litigate. I prefer not to. I prefer to do spirited negotiations, advocacy at a PPT meeting, and if necessary, file complaints, lawsuits, administrative hearing requests, such as a due process hearing. So that's one of the major differences. I'm licensed, I'm trained to be a litigator, and I do go to due process hearings, and typically advocates, at least here in Connecticut, do not. There are some states that allow advocates to represent families in due process hearings. Connecticut is not one of them.
And thank you. Yeah, it's just a question that I get quite often. I'm not sure, Allie and Marla, if you do as advocates. I know that I have been asked that in the past. But I'm going to get to one of our questions that we were asked to before this evening, and this is for everybody to kind of contribute as we go through. So Marla or Allie, you're welcome to respond to this. What is a child supposed to be doing in a classroom instruction if being taken out for subjects and they feel confused in class? So if they're supposed to be having instruction, but they keep getting pulled out for different related services, what recommendations do you have for the parents as to how to broach this subject with the team at a PPT or informal conversations? Oh, Marla, you're on mute.
Sorry.
That's okay.
If they're being pulled out to the point where they're losing instruction, then the work that they're missing needs to be made up or accommodated for. So if they need to have things taught at their level or presented at their level, then they might need to work with a paraprofessional in the classroom or have more undivided attention from a special education teacher. But they can't just sit there after having no instruction. So there needs to be a plan for that time and that instruction to be made up.
One of the first things that I ask at a PPT when the student is going to be receiving services on a pullout situation is, when will the child be pulled out? Okay, so what I call is selective pullout. In other words, we have to be very careful and designate at the PPT when that child will be pulled out. And it's, it depends upon the child's needs. In high school, you don't want the child to be, well, they very rarely pull out of a major course, but in elementary or even middle school, sometimes the child can be pulled out, let's say during a reading class, when the child really needs that reading instruction in general ed. And so we want to make sure that the priority classes that the child needs to be in stays in the general ed and pulled out during non-essential times. And I think that's a good place to start. Find out at the beginning when the child is being pulled out. And then, you give them supplementary, work to make sure that they catch up to any work that they missed in class. Make sure that that's well supported. So, it is a dilemma because there's only 6 hours in the school day, so that time has to come from somewhere, but you don't want it to come from essential times, because that's when the child probably needs the instruction the most within the general ed class, unless that pullout is in place of a core academic subject. So it depends upon the child's needs.
I agree with both of you. And the other thing I think that sometimes people don't always take into consideration is, how does that child transition? Is transitioning going to cause more disruption for that child to then reacclimate back into the class versus a push-in? And if it is a push-in, is it individual instruction? And if it is individual instruction push-in, whereabouts in the classroom is it going to take place so that it can be meaningful and not a distraction for that child to attend? The timing, as you said, Allie, is critical, because there are times in the day that it might be more appropriate to pull a student, whether it's because it's closer, so they're not wasting as much time walking between classes as well. Some school buildings are very big, and it can take a child a long time to transition from one room to the other, which is valuable instructional time that they might be missing during that transitional period as well. So as you both said, you have to really think about the individual child, but also how they're going to respond and adapt to the different changes in environment for that instruction to take place as well.
I would just add one comment to what the three of you said. There is a concept called extended school day. And I have on very rare occasions, unfortunately, not often, where a child might come in a little earlier in the morning or stay after school to get some extra direct instruction if we can't fit it in the school day. And particularly in middle, most definitely in high school, the schedule is sacrosanct. So it's always a process of subtraction. If you want X, we're taking it away from somewhere else in the school day. And so on rare occasions, rather than having subtraction, we have addition of maybe a half hour before school starts, maybe a half hour after school ends. So that is another option. I haven't had it happen often, but on occasion I have.
So I guess.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've had that happen a bunch with dyslexia reading instruction, because it's so often an hour a day and it's so hard to fill in where it will happen. I've had it happen before and after school.
I guess flexibility is the key, right? That we can't be too prescriptive and we can't be too concrete either as an educator. We just have to be open and receptive to modifying our plan based upon the child's needs, which is what we should be doing all the time, and adhering to the IEP, and obviously any related services that we've said we're going to provide, we should be providing, but in the most meaningful way for the student. Just delivering the instruction might not be meaningful if it's taking away from other experiences that they need to have as well.
And I might add to that, Jane, sometimes the taking away is a favorite subject like music or art, something else. And if that's the incentive and the only reason or one of the reasons a child is going to school because they enjoy art, music, or some other subject area, extra or direct instruction shouldn't be at the expense of some enjoyable part of the school day or school week.
Yeah, and that leads into the conversation we all had before we started recording, was the heightened amount of stress and anxiety that students are suffering from increasingly. So Allie and then Marla, do you have any recommendations as to how parents can address the stress and anxiety that they know and have seen that their children are suffering from, and how that can be addressed within the IEP as well?
Well, stress and anxiety is certainly a very high frequency levels, more so than I've ever seen. And it's really targeting all ages. You know, at one time it was, kind of middle school, high school. Now it starts in pre-K. It's really across the board. I urge parents to work collaboratively with the school and any outside providers. I think that network has to form, and it's a point of progression. In other words, it's not going to be fixed in a day or at an IEP meeting. It's on a continuum of services. What does your particular child need as far as support in the within the school? Some students can't even get into the building, okay? And just the thought of, getting out of the car or out of the bus or the van, it's emotionally provoking. So what do we do? Well, there are options. We could start with having the child maybe go into the school during a non-student part of the day, whether it's, after school, or possibly going through another entrance where they don't have to meet up with, a peer group, and they are just seen by a guidance counselor or a social worker or a school psychologist. There's many other options that can be discussed at a PPT. But again, as I started, it is a collaborative effort. I would like to see, a private counselor or therapist work together with the school to come to an understanding, because it needs to be a holistic approach.
Yes, I agree with having an outside provider work with the school district so that everyone's on the same page. I also feel like if we're getting to the point where it's school refusal and it's ongoing school refusal, that a BCBA, Board Certified Behavior Analyst, should get involved and help come up with a plan, especially with positive reinforcement to help the child or student enter the school. I have that currently with one of my clients that the student does have school refusal and they have service dogs at the school, and that's how they're enticing him to get into the school, which is a nice thing. Not all schools have service dogs, but that's just an example. And one of his ways of receiving positive reinforcement and helps him get into the school. Some other strategies, though, in counseling could be working on coping strategies, and not just talking about them, but then having the student implement them. So that so often on IEPs, I'll see that a student will be in a counseling session and they're talking about coping strategies, or they're talking about times when they could have coped and what they could have done instead of escaping a situation. And it's really important to make sure that once the student learns coping strategies, that they're actually able to use them throughout the school day. So that then involves a lot of talk about data being taken through all school environments to assess how the student is doing with coping strategies.
I was just going to say that links into the new IEP and in terms of data collection and documentation. So if a parent has had meaningful conversation like this at a PPT meeting, with the new format, where would you recommend that this information is reported and recorded on the new IEP for the parents to keep a track of?
The new IEP does not mandate a summary page, but if there are those concerns, as a parent or a guardian, you have the right to ask for that summary page to record any of those documentations. I also very frequently urge my clients to record the PPT meeting. So you have that as a documentation as well. But documentation is key. If it's not in writing or it's not recorded, often it's kind of just goes by the wayside and it doesn't exist. So it needs to be documented, whatever your concerns are.
So also after you receive the IEP, I always write an addendum, and that would include any information that's missing from the IEP. I ask that the addendum be attached to the IEP and that the changes be made and that they both be sent back to the parent. So anything that is missing would then be attached to the IEP and noted as part of the document.
Those are excellent comments, because if it's not in the IEP, I always say it doesn't exist. And if it's not in the IEP, as you heard from Marla, send an addendum. It could be in bullet points. It doesn't have to be a 20-page essay as to what you said that's not in the IEP, what you requested that's not in the IEP, and make sure the request includes that this be added to the IEP or at least placed in the student's educational records. I was just going to go ahead.
Add something to that. Another important page that is not part of this new IEP is the prior written notice. And I just want to call attention to that. The old IEP had it and it had to be filled out. Now it is something that's supplementary and it's a separate document. If the school changes placement, changes program, exits the child, or any new decision, or refuses any decision, you have the right and the responsibility to ask for that prior written notice. It's a very important document, and again, it is something that documents what has been decided at that PPT. So just kind of keep that in mind, that it is no longer part of the IEP.
Lawrence, can you explain, Lawrence, to parents the importance of the prior written notice and how they can use that to help them navigate the IEP and PPT process?
The federal law has many requirements. Some of it's procedural, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and some of it's substantive. And one of the most critical pieces of the procedural requirements is the prior written notice. When a school district proposes to change something or refuses to change something, they have to give you prior written notice, which means advance notice. So in Connecticut, we usually give parents at least 5, 10, sometimes 15 days advance notice. That's the prior notice before the action that was proposed or refused will be implemented. And that's where parents need to know their rights. Once if you made a request for an evaluation and it was denied, or you made a request for additional speech and language services and it was denied, that should be in the prior written notice. So you can at that point have a written record of what was proposed or refused by the school district, and parents can decide whether or not they want to act upon their procedural safeguards. Could we get the procedural safeguard? Just in Connecticut, there are a couple of publications I wanted to just show you the cover page. We have procedural safeguards. More often than not, they're being offered by the school districts. One moment, please. And actually, the slide that's up, if you just leave that, that's a parent's guide to special education. If you don't have it, you should. The procedural safeguards sorry, I have an assistant doing some of the technology. The Parent's Guide to Special Education is an overview of what special education is in Connecticut. Do you have the procedural safeguards? The procedural safeguards are your actual rights. And they are numerous. It's above and beyond the, okay, they look like this. Okay. The procedural safeguards, it's about a 60-page booklet here in Connecticut, and it covers consent, informed consent, evaluations, the prior written notice, dispute resolution, access to records, informal complaints, formal complaints such as due process hearings, children who are placed in private schools, what their rights are, referrals to special education, exceptions to the confidentiality of records requirements, independent evaluations. There are a whole host of procedural rights. And in Connecticut and every other state, each district has to provide parents with a copy of the procedural safeguards. These are the rights to what's called a free, appropriate public education. Back in 1982, there was a Supreme Court decision that looked at the procedural safeguards as one way to determine whether or not a free, appropriate public education was being provided. The other way was actual progress on the IEP goals and objectives. So it's important that families understand their rights. The next document that I had was the Parent's Guide to Special Education. That's more of a user-friendly document that many school districts are offering to parents in Connecticut. There may be similar ones in other states. There is, for the older student, just leave that slide there. For the older student, the Transition Bill of Rights is another procedural safeguards document that parents should be aware of. And that's starting, I think it was last year, The transition planning, preparing for students after high school, starts at age 14. So having the transition Bill of Rights is another set of procedural rights that's very important under state law. If you can pull up the parent guide. The parent guide is a publication from the State Department of Education, and it's in user-friendly language. I believe it's in English and Spanish. Some of the documents are being translated into other languages, such as the IEP document, but I don't know if this booklet is in other than English and Spanish. And it's very important that parents know what their rights are, because then they can act on those rights, decide they want to talk to an outside evaluator, they want to talk to an advocate, they want to talk to an attorney, as the case may be, and see how they can, if at all, remedy the violations of the student's rights. It's very important that parents have this, because on a day-to-day basis, none of us who are presenting this evening are there each and every day as much as the family is. The parents, the guardians, others who are involved with the child's life. And it's very important that parents on a day-to-day basis know what to ask for, because you're building a record at these PPT meetings. You're building a record when you send a letter, a note, or an email. Often parents will tell me, I had a conversation with the principal or the teacher. I believe the parent, but there's no record that happened. And that's when an email, a letter, a note, in addition to a conversation, is helpful in helping me as an attorney understand what was or was not requested or what was refused. So the prior written notice is mandatory. For reasons I don't know, it's a separate document. The old IEP had it as part of it, but now it's handed out as a separate document. I just wanted to note that there was one parent or person that asked a question about indirect services and where that's noted on the IEP. It's page number 11 of the new IEP format, where there's a section on, I believe it's indirect services. And that can be for both summer or ESY or regular education.
So talking about summer, this was a question that we had in. How would a parent, this is to all of you, how would a parent effectively advocate or push for summer school when a child is not meeting goals and or you're seeing regression?
So I would tell the parent to call a PPT meeting and show the data, explain the data. That's again why it's really important when you're looking to get data on the goals and objectives, that it's quantitative. So then you have proof through progress monitoring or a progress report, or even additional triennial testing or regular testing, that there has been no move forward and that there is indeed regression. So definitely a PPT to discuss ESY, discuss the regression, discuss lack of mastery of goals and objectives, and move forward from there. If you're not successful, I would definitely suggest hiring an advocate or an attorney.
And then Allie, this is another question we received, but similar kind of follow-up. If you know that your child annually fails to meet average scores of standardized tests and the team's responses, but progress is being made, but you know as a parent the progress is not being made, how would you suggest that you take that conversation forward with the district?
I think it's a very similar situation as what Marla just described. It's data, 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 okay? You've got to have the evidence. So often, and I've been a parent, am a parent as well, it comes from the heart, but when you're at a PPT meeting, it's not just emotional, information. It is quantitative information that you need. And that data supports the progress. So what we have to look at is, you know, I would, as a parent, or if you want to seek out an advocate, an attorney, you have to chart the progress or lack of progress from one year to the next, not just the current year, from one year to the next, the history behind your child's progress, and bring that data to the PPT. And I think it speaks for itself. It's not just the data on the goals and objectives, however, it's also looking at your curriculum-based assessments, your benchmark performances. How does your child measure up or compare to the typical student, you know, compared to state standards? So you look at a variety of assessments and classroom measurements to determine whether your child has made progress. Going back to the ESY question, I just want to add something. I find that when you discuss ESY, the school very typically says, well, there's no regression. We have to keep in mind that the ESY is really a two-pronged rationale. One is regression. The other one is the substantial area of disability. And so it's when you are you know, discussing ESY, how substantial is your child's disability compared to a typical student? Does your child need further instruction during the summer months to maintain his or her progress? So I think we have to keep that in mind. The other part of this is the regression situation. And I would suggest strongly that you, as a parent, also document and bring with you to the PPT the progress from one situation to another. In other words, does your child regress over the summer? What is that regression? Does your child regress over vacation months? Ask the teachers prior to vacation, please give me the baseline, the current progress, and then assess him or her after vacation. So you have to make sure that you're proactive in asking for those details. So when you get to a PPT, you have that data. So just be prepared. That's the idea.
Yeah, and the other thing for anybody that's new to ESY, typically the staff that work in ESY might not be the same team that your child has been familiar with during the school year. So that can also be an adjustment period for the child too. And where possible, you want the child to maybe connect with that team member before the summer ESY program starts, if that is an option and available, so that both the clinician, the teaching staff know who the child is ahead of time, as well as the child maybe having an semblance of recognition of the face, because quite often that transition alone to the new schedule and then the new team can take a while for some children to adapt and adjust to that new session as well. But this leads into, again, before we came on live, we were talking a lot about resources within districts being a challenge of late. And it has been a challenge. It was a challenge before COVID, but it continues to be a real challenge during this very difficult time of recruitment and retention within education, not just of teachers, but also related service providers as well. So what can a parent do at a PPT meeting when a district acknowledges that a child needs a related service or certain interventions or strategies, but the district say, we do not have the personnel or the resources to support your child at this time? And this goes to all three of you, and it's a very pertinent conversation of PPTs I've been to of late.
So usually at that point, I would say that we're requesting a consultant, an outside consultant, to come into the district to work in whatever related service capacity or direct capacity is needed if there is no one at the actual district. If it's all encompassing and it's more than a few related services, which there are mostly a few, or there's no special education teacher, I would ask for potential outplacement depending on the situation and the extent of the child's disability and how much this is adversely affecting his or her education.
The IEP has to be delivered as written. So if we have special education, academic goals and objectives, related service goals and objectives, unfortunately, the federal law and I guess the state law doesn't allow, we don't have the staff to deliver the IEP. So contracting with private organizations and individuals, looking at out-of-district placements, all of this is designed, reimbursing parents. I have that, parents say, look, I'll get my own tutor or my own occupational therapist. Just you cover the expense, or at least the expense that's not covered by private insurance. And sometimes schools are receptive to that because they can arrange to deliver the IEP as written, but it may not be with public school staff, but a blend of public and private resources. And this is increasingly becoming a problem. We talked about school refusal. We talked about anxiety. Staffing increasingly is becoming a problem. There's one district I've dealt with on a regular basis, has over 90 openings, vacancies in the special education area, teaching staff, administrators, related service providers. That problem with a capital or small p should not end up on the backs of the children. There are alternatives that need to be explored. Creativity, out-of-box thinking is especially important when you're dealing with an IEP that cannot be delivered as written. For the person who asked about the indirect services, I just wanted to add page 10 and 11 of the new IEP. I just gave you page 11. So.
Just a quick comment on that. I think the tendency is if the school says something, well, we just don't have the services, the parents kind of just stop there. Oh, but as a parent, your major focus is your child. You are the best advocate for your child. Don't let anybody else say anything differently. You as a parent or guardian are the best advocate. So how to problem solve? Yes, we look towards outside resources, but there's also other options within your school district that you may want to consider and problem solve together with the PPT team. For example, there are other school psychologists in different schools within the different district. There are specialists, related service people, special education teacher. We have to start thinking outside of the box and be creative in how we deliver services. So a special education teacher from one school may be able to maneuver his or her schedule and come to your child's school to deliver services. That goes for PT, OT, or any of the related services. So I think that collaborative approach, problem solving, should really be investigated. And it shows intent as you as a parent, it shows intent that you want to work together with the school. But again, the bottom line is if they can't do it, then you need to go outside this. That's where we're at. So.
And all of this should be done on the record of a PPT meeting. We had received a question from one participant. Can we request a PPT meeting or ask for evaluations? And the answer is yes. So if you know as parents in your heart of hearts, it doesn't feel right, it doesn't sound right, act upon those instincts, act upon those feelings. And if you need to have more data, we heard data many, many times, request an evaluation. Do a records request. You have a right to your child's records. Often what I do is a trend line. Since we're doing triennial evaluations, I do a comparison of the last evaluation to the current evaluation to see if we need a next evaluation. So parents are an important source of information on recoupment, regression, progress. Parents see their child in a variety of settings, not just a school setting. And I always say if a child learns something at school, they should be able to generalize that skill to home or other settings if they in fact learn that. And so parents are an important source of information. So if you need a PPT meeting, ask for it. If you need additional evaluations, ask for them. And then you'll know the response in the prior written notice pages we were talking about.
And don't just ask verbally. Quite often parents say, but I did ask, I spoke to them, I asked them. Whenever you have a verbal conversation, confirm it and clarify it in written form. Say, you know, dear so-and-so, after speaking to you earlier on this afternoon, just to reiterate, I would like a PPT meeting to discuss A, B, and C. So don't just depend upon the verbal word as clarification, always follow up with the written so that you can again use this as documentation to track your concerns and that you did bring them up and that you were really pushing things forward. So written form is really powerful, and date. Emails are good because it's already got a date on it, but if you do submit a letter, make sure it's dated as well, so you have clarification of what you've requested and when you requested that and who you requested it to is also important as well. Don't be afraid to CC people in on a communication just to notify the broader group of what you're trying to accomplish as a parent.
We had a question come in this evening that anonymous attendees said we were told the addendum would be uploaded into the SEDS, that's the new IEP software, but it's not added to the IEP. That's correct. It's part of the educational record. The IEP itself is the official document, and the school districts are allowed to add anything on their end of the software to the student's educational records, and that's where the parent comments come into play. And so the record, the overall records will reflect what the parents have requested, even if it's not in the IEP. That's where the procedural safeguards come into play. If you have a denial of a free appropriate public education because what you asked for is being refused or denied, and it's adversely affecting your child's education, you have procedural safeguards. You can request a due process hearing. You can file an informal complaint with our State Department of Education, which is called the Complaint Resolution Procedure Complaint, CRP. And that is an informal complaint in the State Department of Education. If they assume jurisdiction, there are requirements. Like your complaint has to be less than a year old. They will investigate. They can take up to 60 days to investigate. Because of their staffing shortages, they're asking for extensions of time. But if they find a violation, they will issue a corrective action plan to the district. So these are options to pursue. CRP complaints, due process hearing complaints as well. They're separate and apart, but those are part and parcel of the procedural safeguards.
If parents are concerned, and this was a question we've had, if parents are concerned about the quality of schools within their district and they're looking at options for out-of-district placements, where can they find a list? I know that some districts, they will provide a list. Where can they find a list? But also, if they do find a list from the district, just because a school is on that list, what advice would you provide that parent or that family to explore the options of the out-of-district placements for their child?
There is a list of state-approved private special education schools on the State of Connecticut Special Education website, and you can also just search for it. That if you find that list and you find a school, that does not mean you're going to get your child outplacement. Again, in order to get outplacement, you would need to prove that your child needs that outplacement. And there again, that the data comes into play. It's really important. You need to show once again that the child is not making gains in the public school. And again, it needs to be quantitative, because otherwise you're going to hear staff from the district say, oh, he's doing great or she's doing great, she's making gains, we see progress. So you need to show them that lack of progress. And then to get further into that progress and get that data or receive that data, it's really important, and I mentioned this the last time I was on this meeting, that the IEP include an evaluation method that makes the objectives on the IEP measurable. So I always ask for pre and post baseline data. Right now, the evaluation method is automatically coming up on the IEPs as progress towards short-term objectives, but most of the districts are writing the IEP objectives for a full year, so there are no short-term objectives. So it's really important to make sure that you have quantitative data through pre and post baseline data, and it doesn't just have to be included. It can be included as the evaluation method, but it can also be included in the actual objectives. So again, to receive outplacement, you need to make a case, and it needs to be a strong case. Most of the time, unless it's a behavioral situation, extreme dangerous situation, the district doesn't suggest it. So we often end up in mediation or due process. So it's not an easy way to move forward. The other option is you can withdraw your student from the public school and find a private school that accepts private placement or parental placement, and take care of it on your own. But most people in this day and age don't wish to do that. It's very expensive.
I'd also like to say, regrettably, just because a school is listed on the website as being a state-supported school, that doesn't necessarily mean it is of high quality. And I think as a parent, you should do your due diligence, do your research. You can find out very valuable information about some schools online if there have been some incidents where children might not have been supported in a way that you as a parent would have wished. So just because a school is on that list does not necessarily mean your child, if they should attend that school, would receive a better education than that of one that they're receiving in district. So I would caution everybody to do their due diligence and research, visit the facility, but also do some background research too on the schools that you think might be a viable option. Allie or Lawrence, do you have any other advice regarding out of district placements?
I think you said it all, but I would just really emphasize the fact that once you dwindle down what schools you feel could be appropriate and meet your child's needs, visitation is the best way to go. You really have to see it, feel it, ask questions. We all know websites all look great on the web, but visiting the school, scheduling an appointment, I think just about all private schools at this point will allow that, and you should take, you should take advantage of that visitation.
Just to add to those comments, as Marla pointed out, there is a list of approved private special ed schools, which means a PPT could, doesn't mean they will, make a placement there if they agree. But there are also many schools that are no longer on the list or were never on the list that are, just because you're on the list, it's not a good housekeeping seal of approval. Just because you're not on the list, it doesn't mean you're not an appropriate school. And as Allie pointed out, you need to go there. You have to have your own wisdom and instincts. You have to have your child spend some time there. Many of the schools require a day or two visit to see how the student's reacting, whether this is an appropriate placement. But it's all the data, and the data comes from multiple sources. As I said, parents are an important source of data. There's multiple ways that schools collect data. It's not only IEP progress reports. You have a report card. I just looked at one earlier today. Number one is the lowest grade. The teachers are telling the family this child is doing perfectly well in school, yet a substantial number of the grades were number one for behavior, for reading, and across the board. So there was a lack of symmetry between what the teachers and the staff are telling the parents and what they're actually putting on the report card. We have progress monitoring. It can be DIBELS, Ames Web, NWE MAPS testing. It could be Fontes and Pinnell, reading levels. There are multiple sources of data. And I just spot check many IEPs just with the Fontes Pinnell. It's not a standardized assessment, but if I see it, like I had one, I think it was yesterday, it was level, this child I think is in 4th or 5th grade, but reading at level G, which was 1st grade. Well, there's a reason, are they reading what they're writing? I mean, why is this child in 4th or 5th grade reading 2, 3, 4 grade levels below as measured on the Fontes Pinnell? And then whatever parents see at home, is their child able to do homework independently? Did they understand the lessons? Often my cases involve having an outside evaluation, a neuropsychologist, a clinical psychologist, occasionally a psychiatrist, sometimes speech and language evaluation, sometimes physical therapy and occupational therapy, depending on what area is not progressing. So the data is so critically important. Where it comes from is from multiple sources: the school, the family, outside professionals. And that's how you start to make the case that there's a denial of a free, appropriate public education, which is the legal standard, appropriate progress, meaningful progress. The child knows more today than a year ago. And if you're not seeing that as parents, the data is not supporting that, then you have to look at alternatives. And those are alternatives, as Jane pointed out, are in district. And as Marla pointed out, and I'm pointing out as well, they can be out of district as well. There's no one size fits all.
And just talking about data too, when you receive a progress report, I've received many that say, oh, the child has mastered the skill. Look at the detail of the goal and objective. Is mastery, at what point are they considered to have accomplished mastery? Is it 70% accuracy, 80%? Or look at the data and how that data is collected and recorded. Because quite often you want to make sure that the expectation is just as high as it would be for a neurotypical child. Would a school district be satisfied if a child was humming along at C's and not aspiring or aiming for A's and B's? So look at the expectation too, and challenge and consider that, is that mastery? Is that true mastery of that goal and objective? And Lawrence mentioned earlier, generalizing those skills in the different environments too, until a child can truly generalize a skill across all domains. Is it really mastered? So question and challenge and use your intuition to help guide you. We had a question about, when do you ask for evaluations? Well, my advice would be you ask for evaluations when you're dissatisfied or you're concerned that you don't have a full understanding of your child's needs, or you are concerned about the lack of progress they're making, and you need more understanding as to where those deficits are and what we can do to help them get to where they need to go. And not all evaluations are the same. And you need to be very clear about what it is that you're asking for when it comes to an evaluation as well. Allie, would you have any advice on that in terms of requesting evaluations for students?
Well, I want to go back to one point before I answer the evaluations. I'm glad you brought up the progress monitoring, the progress charting. Oftentimes, I see that the child has gone from an N, which means needs improvement, to an M, mastery, in 3 months' time, and that really shows me that it's very obvious that the evaluation process has not been utilized appropriately in order to really determine if this child has mastered the goal or objectives. Often the objectives are written with support. In other words, your child will accomplish this particular objective with support. Well, can your child accomplish that objective independently, and as Jane pointed out, in generalized settings? So I think it's incumbent upon the parents to really look at these progress reporting with a keen eye and really understand in detail what those mastery levels really truly indicate. And I think it does take a lot of understanding, and before you even go to that PPT, review those progress charts prior to that meeting in detail and be prepared for that. As far as the evaluation, Jane, you asked about any suggestions about the evaluation. I think it depends upon your child's needs. Oftentimes, if your child has difficulty, let's say with reading, a literacy expert is in need. You need to get a literacy evaluation. It really depends upon your child's area of disability. Sometimes it overlaps. There's attention difficulties, along with the learning disability. And so oftentimes I ask for a neuropsychological evaluation, which really integrates all of that information. It's not one size fits all. There's no advice that I can give generally speaking, but you have to match your child's area of need to what the specific evaluator needs to hone in on. What I do suggest strongly is to develop a list of questions and ask your district to develop a list of questions pertaining to what your concerns are. What are you looking for as parents within that evaluation? It guides the evaluator into answering and giving the appropriate assessments within the domain that you're asking about. So those questions, I feel are very essential in guiding the evaluation components and in the ending results to determine the recommendations from the report.
I just want to add to that. Often I hear from parents, the school will refuse an evaluation because he or she is not due for a triennial evaluation. The triennial evaluation is an outer limit. The school, for a child with an IEP, the school district has to complete a comprehensive evaluations, updated evaluations every 3 years. But there's nothing in the law that prevents them from doing it annually or every 2 years. They just can't exceed the 3-year limit. And the purpose of the evaluation, whether it's an initial evaluation, is to identify areas of strengths and weaknesses. And if the weaknesses are to a significant degree, meaning there's an adverse impact upon education, then we look at one of the 14 categories of eligibility in Connecticut: learning disability, autism, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment. There are many categories. And will the student benefit from direct instruction? And that's the IEP. And so for the parent who asked, or the person who asked about, can a child or a student have an IEP if they're taking honors classes, AP classes? The answer is yes, if they have one of the 14 categories of disabilities recognized by law, if there's an adverse impact upon education, and they can benefit from direct instruction, which is the IEP. I had a student a number of years ago, a high school student, on his standardized test scores were out in the stratosphere. I didn't know some of the scores went that high, but he was getting all Fs in high school. So the question was, what was interfering with that student's ability to take advantage of his strengths? And he had some social and emotional issue was the answer to the question. And we eventually got him an IEP and arranged to get him that free, appropriate public education. So the AP classes, the honors classes alone are not dispositive. Sometimes students have a disability and they need reasonable accommodations like extra time or alternate test setting. They have test anxiety. So sometimes students don't qualify for an IEP, but they qualify for what's called the Section 504 plan, which would give them extra time, alternate test setting. They get teacher notes, whatever the accommodations is. So not everybody needs an IEP or qualifies for an IEP, but sometimes there's a fallback position, and that's called a Section 504 plan.
And I just want to follow up on, Marla has been talking a lot about data collection and making sure that you understand and track the data collection. And Marla, can you also just give some advice to parents about it's not just collecting the data, but who is collecting that data is very important as well.
Well, the teachers should be collecting the data. So I used this example before we came on the meeting that if a child is dyslexic and they're receiving the Wilson reading program, that you want to request the data from that program. So the program should be followed with fidelity, and that includes word reading list and spelling dictation sheets. You want to ask for copies of that so that you can see where the real progress is. If you're looking for fluency to see if the child's words correct per minute have increased, then you want to ask for AIMSweb or DIBBLES to see what data is coming from that. If you're looking to see if the reading level went up, all of this information could be attained from the teachers. If you're looking for math to increase, you can look at the NWEA scores. You can ask for a key math test to be done. So there are multiple ways of getting progress monitoring data, but the teacher should be keeping this kind of data anyway. So you want to ask to receive it. So that's where the progress monitoring, the frequency of it is on your IEP right now, and it could range from daily to bi-monthly. And I always ask for it as frequently as possible. So I usually say a week because they're not going to hand it to us daily. And we end up with a month. But it's important that you know what data is going to be taken, that you know when you'll receive it, and that you'll actually have the raw data in your hands. You don't want to ask for data and then have them say, oh, let me compile something for you. And they'll just write up a little blurb kind of after the fact. That's not helpful. We want that actual data.
Just a suggestion, if your child has an IEP, there's always a case manager. It's usually the special education teacher. Sometimes if the child has a disability in the area of speech and language, it could be the speech and language teacher, but there's always a case manager. I think data collection is very overwhelming, especially if you're not in the educational field, and it's just all over the place. So you may want to ask the case manager to coordinate and gather all of the data points, collect them, and share them with you. So that way it's streamlined for you, which I think is really important, because the special ed teacher has a set of data, but so does the school psychologist. And if you're working with the BCBA, so does the BCBA. So if you can streamline and then gather it all together in a one lump sum, I think it would be more meaningful and less overwhelming. That's just a suggestion you may want to follow up with.
Yeah, and just speaking on behalf of myself, Marla and Allie, as advocates and educators, and having been doing this for a number of years, when a parent receives data, they don't necessarily know what they're looking for or what they're reading or how to interpret that data. I know that Marla, Allie, and myself, we have the ability to understand the data and to really dig down a bit deeper than some parents are, because it is overwhelming to receive multiple reports or to understand what a DIBBLES means or these other nuances. So there's a real value to taking your time to connect with people such as ourselves, Marla, Allie, myself, and Lance, to help you as a parent not feel overwhelmed by the data you're receiving from the district, and then to help you navigate that data, because you can end up with a tremendous amount that can become very overwhelming quite quickly to understand, particularly all the acronyms and the deviations, from the standard norm and so on, can be a lot for some parents to navigate, which is the value of people that do the work such as ourselves.
And that's why it's important to meet with the teacher or the person who's taking the data, the school psychologist. You understand the lingo, you understand the acronyms, you understand the fine print. I think it was DIBBLES or AIMSweb a number of years ago. I had a school district showing me these absolutely beautiful color graphs, and my client, a middle school student, was at the top of the chart, and they're saying, what's the problem? He's at the top of the charts. And I look in the very fine print at the bottom of the page, it was based upon first grade standards. So in middle school, he was at the top of the chart doing first grade work based upon the Ames Web or Dibbles. And we quickly had a different kind of discussion once I pointed that out, because nobody was bringing up the fine print until I did. They were just focusing on these beautiful color charts showing the students at the top of the graph that was being presented. And that's why speaking to pediatricians, speaking to advocates, speaking to psychiatrists, psychologists, speaking to school staff, so you understand what's going on is so critically important. Unlike Jane, Allie, or Marla, I'm a lawyer. All of my knowledge is after acquired through experience, talking to school staff, talking to psychologists, reading, doing my own research. And that's why I can come across the way I do and talk about the fine print at the bottom of an Ames Web or a Dibbles. Or that's why I can tell a client, they don't know what level G means on a Fontes and Pinnell. I said, it means your child in 4th or 5th grade is reading on the first grade level on that assessment. No one had ever explained that to that family. And knowledge is essential, knowledge is powerful. And so are the instincts that parents have. And I always tell parents, if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't sound right, don't talk yourself out of that feeling. We are getting to a point of closure. We've had some excellent questions. I apologize if we didn't get to every question, but we are continuing a series of webinars, Jane and I, and I'm sure we'll have Allie and Marla back at a future date in the not too distant future, because we very much enjoy their wisdom, insight, and experience. So I want to thank all the attendees and our guests for joining us this evening. We will continue the Zoom webinars throughout the balance of the 22-23 school year. We are going to have our next webinar on February 7th, and we will be discussing, Jane and I will be discussing educational roadblocks, independent evaluations, and we plan on having 2 special guests, Dr. Michael Cohen, who's a psychologist, a neuropsychologist, and we plan on having Aubrey Schmala, who is an occupational therapist and the director of sensational achievements, and to discuss overcoming educational roadblocks and independent evaluations. And that, for some of you who have asked about evaluation, that next webinar on February 7th might be helpful to you. And lastly, I want to thank my daughter, Rachel, who is sitting to my immediate right, who's put all this together, responding to all of your inquiries. She will send you a copy of tonight's recording. And we welcome your questions, as we received some prior to tonight's webinar. During tonight's webinar, we did our best, Jane and I did our best to get to those questions, but there is a limited amount of time. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Marla and Allie from taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us this evening. So that's all I have to say. And Jane?
That's all I have to say. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, Allie and Marla. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. I hope families reach out to you for additional guidance and support. And I just wanted to remind parents that live in local to Connecticut that we do have a Facebook group called JumpStart, and also on Instagram, where we like to invite you for free to come and connect and meet other parents, because that's also a valuable source of information and insight for you. We host free events. Tomorrow morning, there will be a coffee meetup. So if you go to the Instagram or Facebook page, you'll get to meet other parents. I try to attend as many of those as I can. We do fun activities as well as just opportunities to connect with other parents of different age children, different stages of life, but it's a really nice way to meet others within the community. So thank you for joining us this evening, and I really look forward to seeing you all again very soon.
And I'll join you in saying thank you again for all the viewers for taking your time to come and join us tonight. Thank you, Rachel. I know how hard you work, and it wouldn't be possible to be here tonight without you. And to all of our viewers, we have still a long way to go before the end of the school year. So if you do have concerns and you feel that you're getting overwhelmed, reach out to an advocate, attorney, a peer, or whatever, but don't do it alone. I think that you know, you deserve the support as much as your child deserves that support, and working together is probably the best in everybody's interest. Thank you.
I echo what everyone else just said, and thank you for spending this time with us.
Thank you. Stay healthy and safe, and we will hope to see you next month if you join our webinar. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.